The candlelight reflected softly on the dining room windows while laughter filled the house. Crystal glasses clinked together as everyone smiled. Then my mother stood up, raised her glass, and proudly announced, "We have decided to spend $80,000 on Leah's education in Paris." The room instantly filled with applause. My relatives smiled, congratulated my sister, and talked about her bright future. Everyone looked happy for her. I quietly put down my fork and asked, "What about me?" My mother didn't even look in my direction. "You don't deserve any help, Alice." The words were calm, but they cut deeper than any scream ever could. The room fell silent. Even the laughter disappeared. I forced a small smile, nodded once, and pretended that her words hadn't shattered something inside me. But I never forgot that moment. That family dinner became the last one I ever attended. 4 years later, my sister slowly parked her car outside my beautiful $5 million home. She called my father with tears in her eyes because none of them could understand how the daughter they ignored had become more successful than they had ever imagined. They had no idea what happened after I walked away. When I was 10 years old, birthdays never felt like they belonged to me. Every year, my sister Leah's birthday looked like something from a movie. There were colorful balloons, expensive cakes, photographers, gifts stacked across the living room, and long speeches about how talented and special she was. Family members praised her intelligence and talked about the amazing future waiting for her. My birthdays were completely different. Instead of gifts, I usually received practical things. One year, my parents handed me a monthly bus pass. "You're old enough to be independent," my father said. There was no party. No balloons. No photos. Just another lesson about growing up. I still remember my bus driver's name. Henry. Every morning he greeted me with a warm smile as I climbed onto the school bus carrying a backpack that felt almost heavier than I was. I always chose the same seat near the window. The seat beside me stayed empty almost every day. Sometimes I wondered if that empty seat looked the same way my life felt. At home, everything was measured. My mother measured love by achievements. My father measured people by money. If something couldn't produce results, they believed it wasn't worth their attention. When Leah joined the debate club, my mother proudly told everyone that she was becoming a future leader. When I joined the robotics club, she walked into my room, looked at the scattered wires, tools, and computer parts, then frowned. "Find something people actually care about, Alice." Those words stayed with me for years. Leah received the newest laptop every time a better model came out. She had the biggest bedroom in the house. She wore expensive clothes and traveled with our parents during every school holiday. Meanwhile, I fixed everyone's phones whenever they stopped working. I repaired the family computer. I edited Leah's homework. I helped with groceries. I cleaned the garage. I ran errands in heavy rain without complaining. Whenever relatives visited, my mother smiled and introduced Leah as her brilliant daughter. I was simply called helpful. My father usually described me as practical. Neither word ever sounded like love. When I was 15, I entered a local coding competition. For weeks, I spent every evening teaching myself new programming skills. I barely slept. I kept rewriting my project until everything finally worked. One Friday afternoon, an email arrived. "Congratulations. Your project has won first place." I couldn't stop smiling. I printed the certificate on our old printer because nobody else seemed interested. My father was outside fixing the garden sprinkler when I walked over and showed him the paper. He glanced at it for barely 2 seconds. "Well," he said, "that's a start." Then he went back to working on the sprinkler. He never asked what I had built. He never asked how difficult it had been. He never asked how I felt. That same evening, Leah posted online that she had reached the final interview for a student exchange program in Paris. Our family group chat exploded with hundreds of congratulatory messages. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and grandparents all celebrated her achievement. My phone buzzed non-stop. Not a single notification was about me. At dinner, every conversation somehow returned to Leah. Her grades. Her teachers. Her future. Her dreams. Whenever I tried to share something about my own life, My mother interrupted. Leah mentioned something similar last week. Or, let's get back to something important. Eventually, I stopped trying. Silence hurt less than being ignored. By the time I reached high school, I had created a mobile app that helped students without cars track local bus routes more easily. The project became surprisingly popular. A local newspaper even wrote an article about it and called it an innovative solution for students. I proudly brought the newspaper home. My mother barely looked at it. You could have spent that time making better connections instead. She clipped the article and saved it. Not because she was proud. Only because our family name appeared in print. Graduation day arrived. The auditorium was full of smiling families holding flowers and cameras. My parents sat in the front row wearing matching pastel outfits. When my name echoed through the speakers, I searched for their faces. Neither of them stood. Neither of them clapped. Instead, Leah cheered loudly for one of her friends graduating later in the ceremony. I walked across the stage holding my diploma tightly. Not because I felt proud. Because I needed proof that my hard work had actually mattered. That evening, while everyone took family photos, my mother wrapped her arms around Leah. "I'm proud of both my daughters," she said. Then she smiled warmly at my sister. "But especially you, sweetheart." The camera flashed. I smiled because everyone expected me to. Later that night, I returned to my room. I pinned my old bus pass above my desk. Right beside the coding certificate nobody had cared about. Rain tapped softly against the window. As I listened to the steady rhythm, I finally understood my place inside my own family. Leah was always the center of attention. I was expected to disappear quietly into the background. Everything finally became clear during that dinner about Paris. The dining room smelled of roasted meat, polished wood, and expensive candles. Leah happily practiced French phrases while my mother corrected her pronunciation between sips of wine. Earlier that day, I had finished repairing the cafe's broken Wi-Fi system where I worked part-time. My hands still smelled faintly of coffee and warm electronics. Then my father cleared his throat. "We've finalized everything," he announced. "We're paying $80,000 for Leah's tuition, apartment, flights, and living expenses. She should focus on studying, not worrying about money." He said it as though the decision had never been open for discussion. My mother smiled proudly. The pearls around her neck reflected the candlelight. For a moment, I honestly believed they had forgotten to mention my plans. Surely they had something prepared for me too. I slowly asked, "I'm still short $2,000 for my dorm payment this semester. Could you help me? I'll pay every dollar back." My mother looked directly into my eyes for the first time that evening. "You don't deserve help, Alice." The sentence wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It broke something inside me. Even Leah stopped smiling. I waited for my father to disagree. He simply poured himself another glass of wine. "We invest where we expect results," he said calmly. "You made your own choices." At that moment, everything inside me became completely still. The sound of silverware. The gentle humming of the chandelier. The smell of melted candle wax. Every tiny detail became permanently burned into my memory. I smiled one final time. "I understand," I said quietly. No one answered. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and walked toward the front door. The scraping sound of the chair against the floor was louder than any argument I could have started. Outside, cold rain had begun falling over Seattle. Tiny drops tapped against my windshield like a clock counting down the seconds of my old life. By the time I reached my small apartment, my phone was vibrating non-stop with messages from family members asking why I had left so suddenly. For the first time in my life, I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I turned off my phone, looked out at the rain, and made a promise to myself. From that night forward, I would stop waiting for my family to believe in me. I would build a future so successful that one day they would wonder how they had failed to see my worth. And when that day finally arrived, they would realize they hadn't lost me overnight. They had been losing me for years. "Don't be dramatic," the message said. "You'll regret this." I looked at the screen for a few seconds before turning my phone face down. The display went black, and the room became quiet. That night changed my life. It was the moment I stopped waiting for people to treat me fairly. I stopped hoping that someone would finally understand me or give me the respect I wanted. Instead, I made a different decision. I would build a life that no one could control, question, or take credit for. The next morning, I picked up my phone and slowly deleted every family contact. I didn't cry. I didn't make a speech. I didn't wait for anyone to call first. One by one, the names disappeared until my contact list felt empty. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of peace. The silence that followed felt cleaner than years of empty promises and forced apologies. My apartment in Capitol Hill was small and simple. Every 10 minutes, the old heater made a loud clicking sound. The walls carried the smell of fresh laundry mixed with burnt toast drifting from my neighbor's kitchen. It wasn't a perfect place, but it was mine. I made a cup of coffee, opened my laptop, and created a new folder. I named it Life Plan. Inside that folder, I created 3 documents. The first was called Savings Goals. The second was Projects. The third was Personal Growth. I wasn't completely sure where my future was heading, but I knew one thing. If I wanted real control over my life, I needed to organize it myself. Every goal, every plan, and every step would be written down. Nothing would depend on anyone else's approval. During the day, I worked at a small coffee shop. I served drinks, greeted customers, cleaned tables, and fixed the cafe's Wi-Fi whenever it stopped working. It wasn't exciting, but it paid my bills. At night, everything changed. I sat at my small desk under a yellow lamp while rain tapped gently against the windows. The city outside slowly became quiet, but inside my apartment my keyboard never stopped clicking. I wrote code, learned new skills, and built small software projects. Every hour I worked, every dollar I saved, and every lesson I learned was carefully recorded. I created spreadsheets for my expenses. I tracked my progress every week. My personal rule became simple. Document everything. People can forget conversations. They can deny promises. They can rewrite history. But numbers don't lie. Data remembers everything. A few months later, all those late nights finally paid off. I was offered a part-time IT position at a growing logistics startup in downtown Seattle. The office felt completely different from anywhere I had worked before. Glass walls reflected the morning sunlight. Whiteboards were filled with ideas and colorful diagrams. The air smelled like new carpet, fresh coffee, and ambition. Everyone believed they were building something important. My employee badge read, Wayfinder Labs, Contract Engineer. There were only 12 people working there, but the company felt full of energy. Most employees left around 6 in the evening. I usually stayed for several more hours. I enjoyed the quiet. Without meetings or conversations, I could focus completely on solving problems. Many nights, I worked until sunrise painted the office windows a soft gray. One evening, while I was testing a side project, one of the senior engineers, Arjun, walked over to my desk. He watched my screen for a few moments before asking, "You're optimizing delivery routes, aren't you?" I smiled. "It's just something I've been building on my own." He looked impressed. "Then stop treating it like a hobby," he said. "Make it your main project. If it works, we'll present it to the team." His confidence surprised me. Over the next 2 weeks, we worked together to improve the software. We tested different algorithms, cleaned huge amounts of data, and solved one problem after another. Soon the project had a name. Wayfinder. We introduced it to small local businesses first. Coffee shops used it to organize deliveries. Bakeries planned their daily routes more efficiently. Flower shops reduced travel time and fuel costs. Every successful test felt deeply personal. Every spreadsheet I cleaned. Every report I finished. Every customer who saved time. It all felt like I was taking back a small piece of the control I had lost years earlier. I kept detailed records of everything. Notes. Client emails. Delivery reports. Fuel usage. Carbon emissions. Every improvement was saved with dates and evidence. When the pilot program succeeded, Arjun stood in front of the team and called it innovation. I quietly called it proof. Proof that hard work eventually speaks louder than excuses. My roommate, Zoe, often visited the office after work carrying takeout boxes. "You seriously need a break," she laughed one evening as she handed me dinner. "I'm building something," I replied. "I know," she smiled. "But what exactly are you building?" I thought about it before answering. "Distance." She looked confused. "Distance from what?" "From needing anyone's permission." She didn't laugh after that. She simply nodded. The months passed quickly. Charts replaced calendars. Progress reports replaced old memories. Small victories slowly became bigger ones. Around that time, I also started therapy. Dr. Monroe helped me understand things I had never been able to explain. She introduced words that finally described my childhood. Conditional love. Emotional invalidation. People-pleasing. One afternoon, after listening carefully to my story, she quietly said, "Your parents didn't reward you for simply being yourself." I looked at her. "They rewarded you only when you were useful to them." The room became silent. For the first time, someone had described my entire childhood in a single sentence. I nodded slowly. "Then I'll decide what being useful means," I answered. "And this time, it will be for me." By the end of the year, Wayfinder had become much more than a software project. It became my voice. I didn't need to argue anymore. The numbers spoke for themselves. Reports replaced emotional debates. Results replaced explanations. When the company decided to turn the project into its own startup, I was offered the position of Chief Technology Officer and co-founder. We signed the legal documents in a modern conference room overlooking Lake Union. Rain slowly rolled down the glass windows while everyone celebrated. When it was my turn to sign, my hand didn't shake. I signed my name with complete confidence. Every contract was scanned. Every invoice was organized. Every meeting was documented. It wasn't because I expected betrayal. It was because structure gave me peace. Control finally had a shape, and I had learned how to build it. The next 3 years passed almost quietly. Wayfinder expanded from a tiny office with 2 desks into a company occupying 2 entire floors. Our environmental optimization model attracted national attention. Major companies became clients. An angel investor funded our expansion after reviewing months of performance data. Life changed. But I didn't. I still wore the same grey hoodies. I still tied my hair the same way every morning. I didn't post luxury photos online or chase attention. The only expensive thing I bought was a better laptop. I kept my old computer inside a drawer. It reminded me where everything had started. One evening, while cleaning that drawer, I found a folded piece of paper. It was the note I had written years earlier after that painful family dinner. The words "call mom" had been crossed out so many times that the paper had torn. I gently touched the rip with my fingers. I didn't feel anger anymore, only understanding. I folded the note neatly and placed it inside a folder labeled Archive, Lessons Learned. Time continued moving forward. 4 more years passed with steady growth, quiet mornings, and meaningful work. Then one ordinary afternoon, my phone buzzed. A real estate app had sent a new property listing. Normally I ignored those notifications. This time, curiosity made me open it. The house overlooked a peaceful lake. Modern glass walls reflected the water. Warm wooden finishes blended perfectly with nature. The design was simple, calm, and beautiful. The asking price was $5 million. Years earlier, that number would have sounded impossible. Now it was simply a decision. A few weeks later, I bought it. No cosigner. No family approval. No shared ownership. Just my name. The morning I moved in, the air smelled of wet cedar after the rain. The rooms echoed because they were still empty. Instead of hanging expensive artwork on the walls, I chose something much more meaningful. I framed the green bus pass I had received on my 18th birthday. It reminded me of where my journey truly began. Below the frame, I placed a small plaque. It read, "Broken Roots. Better Paths." Every evening, I stood beside the large windows and watched the rain slide slowly down the glass. The silence inside the house no longer felt lonely. It felt safe. For the first time in my life, silence didn't mean abandonment. It meant freedom. It meant healing. It meant peace. As I looked at my reflection in the window, it appeared soft and distant, almost like the shadow of the person I used to be. But this time, the reflection didn't look uncertain. It looked steady, strong, and finally, someone I could trust. The house was quiet. The only sound was the soft humming of the washing machine somewhere down the hallway. It created a peaceful rhythm that filled the silence without disturbing it. I stood by the large window, watching gentle waves move across the lake as the afternoon light reflected on the water. Sometimes my thoughts drifted back to my parents. Not with anger anymore. Not even with sadness. Just curiosity. I wondered if they still believed that love had to be earned. I wondered if they still measured people's value by what they could give instead of who they were. Most of all, I wondered if they ever thought about the daughter who had stopped calling, stopped asking for help, and quietly built a life without them. Those questions no longer kept me awake at night. They were simply thoughts that came and went like passing clouds. I closed my laptop, reviewed the day's payments, locked every file, and turned off the lights one room at a time. Outside, the lake shimmered beneath the evening sky, glowing silver under the fading sunlight. Years ago, I had spent my life trying to escape their silence. Now I had learned something far more valuable. I had found peace inside my own. Everything changed on a bright Saturday morning. Golden sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting long stripes of light across the wooden floor. Ethan and I were getting ready to visit the local farmer's market. We planned to buy fresh bread, vegetables, flowers, and spend the afternoon together. As I reached for my keys, my phone vibrated. An unknown number flashed across the screen. Normally, I ignored calls like that. My thumb hovered over the decline button. Something told me not to. I answered. Hello. For a few seconds, all I heard was uneven breathing. Then a familiar voice spoke. Alice, it's me. Leah. She sounded nervous, almost frightened. I was driving through Medina today, she said quietly. I passed a house with your name on the front gate. She paused. Do you really live there? Outside, the automatic sprinklers clicked softly across the lawn while I waited for her to continue. What are you really trying to ask? I said calmly. Her breathing became heavier. I just don't understand. Another pause. How did you get a place like that? Before I could answer, the call suddenly ended. I stared at the dark screen, seeing only my own reflection looking back at me. Within an hour, my phone exploded with notifications. Missed calls. Voicemails. Text messages. Names I hadn't seen in years appeared one after another. Mom. Dad. Aunt June. Grandma. Even distant relatives who had never bothered to contact me before. Every message sounded different. But they all carried the same hidden purpose. My mother's voicemail came first. Her voice was gentle, carefully controlled, almost rehearsed. Sweetheart, Leah told us something unbelievable. Please call us. She's upset. Don't let jealousy come between this family. Then came my father's message. Calm. Formal. Almost like a business meeting. Alice, it's your father. I think it's time we talk like adults. No matter what has happened, we're still family. Family. That word always returned when they wanted something. Never when I needed someone. Later that evening, a courier arrived at my front door carrying a neatly sealed envelope. The paper was thick and expensive. My mother's elegant handwriting covered the front. I opened it. The letter began warmly, almost lovingly. Leah is expecting a baby. You're going to be an aunt. Maybe this is the perfect time for our family to heal. For a moment, I almost believed her. Then the real reason appeared. Your father has been struggling financially. The roof on the family house needs major repairs. Families help each other through difficult times. The final sentence was written carefully. I know you're not the kind of person who would turn your back on family. I smiled sadly. Folded the letter once. then twice. Walked to the kitchen, dropped it into the trash, and never looked back. That night I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel disappointed. Instead, I opened the notebook my therapist had encouraged me to keep years earlier. One section was titled, Healthy Boundaries. At the bottom of the page, I added one new sentence. They don't miss me. They miss the role I used to play in their lives. Reading those words felt strangely freeing. 3 days later, I wrote 2 letters. The first was addressed to my mother. I explained that if she truly wanted a relationship, it would have to follow 3 simple rules. No asking for money. No guilt. No unexpected visits. I wasn't asking for perfect apologies. I was asking for respect. The second letter went to my father. It was much shorter. You once called relationships an investment with expected returns. So here's mine. I invested in freedom. Let's finally close this account with honesty. His reply arrived the next morning. Just one sentence. Meet me Thursday. 10 o'clock. Fremont Cafe. Nothing else. The cafe overlooked the bridge. Rain tapped softly against the windows, and the smell of roasted coffee filled the room. He arrived exactly on time. His coat was perfectly pressed, just as I remembered. But his eyes looked older. More tired. He sat down slowly. You look different, he said. I smiled politely. Is that a compliment? He hesitated. I don't know. Different is enough, I answered. For a while we talked about work, the weather, and anything except the past. Eventually he sighed. Your mother wasn't perfect. I stayed quiet. We all made mistakes. Still I said nothing. Finally he looked at me. We did the best we could. I met his eyes. No, I said gently. It wasn't simply a mistake. It was a choice. He frowned. What do you mean? You invested thousands of dollars protecting appearances. You believed image mattered more than people. I built everything I have with almost nothing. The difference isn't money. It's honesty. He looked down at his untouched coffee. The steam slowly disappeared into the air. Neither of us spoke for a long time. When I stood to leave, I placed a few dollars on the table for my drink. Then I smiled. You don't owe me anything anymore. That's exactly the point. I walked away feeling lighter than I had in years. A week later, Wayfinder Labs sponsored Seattle's annual education gala. The ballroom sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers. Elegant music drifted through the room while guests laughed over glasses of wine. Ethan gently squeezed my hand. You okay? I nodded. Then I saw them. My mother stood near the entrance wearing pearls. Leah wore a pale blue dress, her pregnancy giving her face a softer, calmer look. They noticed me almost immediately. Their smiles appeared the moment other people started watching. My mother approached confidently. We're so proud of everything you've accomplished, she said sweetly. You've been incredibly blessed. She paused before adding. And successful people always remember to give back. She glanced toward Leah. The baby is coming soon. Then toward me again. Your father still needs help fixing the house. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I simply smiled. Excuse me for a moment. I walked toward the stage. A staff member handed me a white envelope I had prepared before the event. I stepped up to the microphone. The room slowly became quiet. I'd like to make a personal donation tonight, I began. I am giving $80,000 to create scholarships for young women who have spent their lives being told they weren't worth investing in. Silence filled the ballroom. Then applause erupted. It rolled across the room like distant thunder. I turned toward my mother. Years earlier, she had called money an investment. Tonight, I was using that same amount to invest in hope. Not in appearances. Not in expectations. But in futures. The giant screen behind me displayed the donation. $80,000. Donated by Alice Collins. The amount shone brightly beneath the stage lights. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't humiliation. It was proof that kindness could accomplish more than control ever could. My mother's smile slowly disappeared. My father had just entered the room. He stopped walking the moment he saw the screen. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. When the applause finally ended, I thanked the audience, stepped off the stage, and walked past my family without stopping. Outside, cool Seattle rain had begun to fall again. It washed over the sidewalks, the trees, and the quiet streets. The city felt fresh, clean, peaceful. When I arrived home later that night, I didn't post pictures online. I didn't write a speech. I didn't explain anything. Some victories don't need an audience. The people who matter already understand them. And the ones who don't never really wanted to. Silence can spread faster than breaking news. Sometimes, the quiet after a storm says more than 1,000 words ever could. The next morning, the whole city was covered in a soft blanket of mist. Light rain fell from the grey sky, making everything look peaceful and fresh. I stood barefoot on the cold wooden deck beside the lake. The wet wood felt cool under my feet, but I didn't move. The lake looked like a sheet of silver, with tiny raindrops creating gentle circles across its calm surface. For the first time in a very long while, I wasn't waiting for my phone to ring. My phone was still inside the house, lying face down on the table. It had been silent since that unforgettable night. A few days ago, that silence would have filled me with fear and loneliness. I would have checked it every few minutes, hoping someone would call, text, or simply remember me. But today was different. That silence no longer felt like rejection. It felt like peace. It felt like something I had finally earned after surviving so many painful days. Inside the house, everything was calm. The only sounds were the soft hum of the washing machine and the quiet bubbling of coffee brewing in the kitchen. Ethan stood by the counter, making breakfast like it was any ordinary morning. He looked at me and smiled. "Are you okay?" he asked. I looked out at the rain before answering. "Yeah," I said with a small smile. "I think I finally am." He nodded. "You looked lighter last night." I thought about his words for a moment before shaking my head. "I'm not lighter," I said softly. "I'm just finished carrying things that were never mine to carry." He understood without asking another question. After Ethan left for work, the house became quiet again. I walked slowly into my office. The large glass windows stretched from floor to ceiling, giving me a perfect view of the peaceful lake outside. The moving water looked almost like a movie playing in slow motion. My desk was simple and clean. There was only my laptop, a coffee mug with cold coffee still inside, and a small glass frame sitting near the window. Inside the frame was an old green bus pass. Years ago, someone had handed it to me and told me it represented responsibility. At the time, I believed them. I thought responsibility meant sacrificing my happiness, ignoring my feelings, and always putting other people first. Now, when I looked at that same bus pass, it meant something completely different. It reminded me of freedom. It reminded me of the day I chose myself. I opened the journal I had been writing in during therapy. Every page held memories of fear, doubt, anger, hope, and healing. It wasn't just a notebook anymore. It was proof that I had survived. I turned to the last empty page. For a few moments, I simply stared at it before writing my final entry. They taught me that love had to be earned. They made me believe I had to work harder, stay quieter, and become someone else just to deserve kindness. But I finally learned the truth. Real love is never something you earn. Real peace is never something another person gives you. Both begin the moment you stop asking people for permission to exist. I closed the journal gently. Outside, a heron lifted its wings and flew across the lake. It moved slowly through the thick fog, disappearing little by little until it became nothing more than a shadow. I watched it until it was gone. Then I found myself thinking about everything that had brought me to this moment. The long nights sitting alone in front of glowing computer screens. The endless hours writing code while everyone else slept. The advice that sounded helpful but was really just another way of saying I wasn't good enough. The constant pressure to prove my value. The feeling that no matter how much I achieved, someone would always ask for more. For years, I believed my worth depended on meeting other people's expectations. Now I knew better. None of those voices owned me anymore. None of those opinions could decide who I was. Far beyond the quiet lake, distant thunder rolled through the sky. It wasn't loud enough to be frightening. It sounded soft, almost comforting, like nature reminding me that every storm eventually moves on. I shut down my laptop. I turned off the lights. Then I sat beside the window and listened to the rain. It no longer sounded like the night I drove away with tears in my eyes, wondering if I had made the right decision. Now it sounded like new beginnings. It sounded like freedom. It sounded like the life I had chosen for myself. People once told me I didn't deserve help. Maybe they believed that. But looking back, I realized help was never what I truly needed. What I needed was distance from the people who kept breaking my confidence. I needed silence so I could hear my own thoughts again. I needed time to heal without anyone telling me how fast I should recover. And I needed the courage to build a life that no one could control or take away. That was the greatest gift I ever gave myself. Even now, whenever rain taps softly against the glass, I don't hear sadness anymore. I don't hear regret. I hear proof. Proof that healing is possible. Proof that leaving was the right choice. Proof that the strongest people are not the ones who never fall, they are the ones who find the strength to stand up, walk away, and never look back. If someone has ever made you feel like you weren't enough, remember this. Your value has never depended on their opinion. Sometimes the bravest thing you will ever do is quietly walk away without explaining yourself. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes, silence is the loudest answer you will ever give. And if this story touched your heart, don't leave just yet. Tell me where you're watching from and share your own journey. I'd love to know how far your silence has carried you, and how it helped you become the person you are today.